Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this Delta EE webinar. As you're aware, I'm sure you're aware, this is the sixth in a series of six. So we're incredibly excited to be sharing this, this last session with you. So we're going to be focusing on bundling and how to make money in bundling within the new energy space. For those of you who are familiar with what we've done before, we've got our 6 different categories, and this one will be focusing on bundling the 6 of those. So let's get started. I am Jenny, I'm a senior analyst at Delta EE, and I've been working on this research for the last year or so. I'm joined by my 2 colleagues who are also working on this stream of work with me. We've got Charmaine, who is based in Bath.
Hi, everyone.
Charmaine's calling in, so her sound might be slightly different from ours, but that's Charmaine. And we've also got Kitty.
Hello.
Fantastic, great. So hopefully that will give an indication as to voices when we're speaking, and so you can associate the different slides with the different people. Just a quick reminder as well that this isn't the only webinar we do. We've got lots of previous ones that you can find on our YouTube channel. We've also got our next one that's coming up on the 14th of December, and that is on our Freedom project, which is focusing on hybrid heat pumps, a really big, interesting project there.
Yeah, and it's with a local utility in the UK called Wales and West, and hopefully it's got quite a lot of press, so it's worthwhile checking out if anyone has a few moments.
Brilliant. Well, I'll start off today's webinar by just giving some of the key messages that we're hoping to get across. First of all, we acknowledge that bundling is not a new approach to business models, nor is it particularly centric to the energy sector. However, despite this, we have identified it as an important innovation trend, especially for incumbent energy suppliers. I single out incumbents particularly because we think that many of the startups in this space will struggle to successfully integrate bundling to their business models. This is because incumbent energy suppliers have the resources and pre-existing networks required to use this sort of business model at scale. It's also really quite difficult to implement bundling strategies successfully. As we will discuss later on in this webinar, bundling can be more than simply bolting on additional products to a pre-existing appliance or service offer. As this model becomes more commonplace, it will need to be adopted in an increasingly sophisticated and complex manner if it is to remain attractive both to customers and company boards.
Fantastic. So if any of you are familiar with Delta EE research, we have our meatballs on top, so which is essentially our key messages up front. So thank you, Kitty, for sharing that with us. On to the agenda. This follows the communications that we sent out previously, the three key sections that we're going to cover. Just before we get to that, we'll do a quick introduction for those of you who are less familiar with Delta.
So thanks, Jenny. Delta Energy Environment, that's what the EE stands for. If you guys didn't know that, we provide advisory services to any actors in the energy sector who are looking to transition from what we call old energy to new energy. And when we talk about new energy, we talk about distributed, low carbon, customer centric. And in particular, we focus on the value being downstream at the customer end rather than upstream in the asset generation end. We work with many different companies, a selection on the screen there, ranging from utilities and product manufacturers. Thank you. So 2 areas that we focus on at Delta. One is subscription-based research, which is where the new energy business model teams are based, and that's kind of the top bar at the top of the screen. We also have 3 research hubs beneath that which kind of interlink, one around heat, one around digital, and one around flexibility. And we will be launching a new service around electric vehicles next spring as well, if there anyone that's interested. We also have a customer panel, which is primary research, and we're just about to expand it throughout Western Europe, where we test ideas and propositions with domestic end users. So if anyone's interested in seeing how they could utilise that, please do get in contact. The other side of our business is a consulting business which draws on all of our research and helps companies articulate market drivers and strategies for success. So that's a quick summary about us. Specifically, new energy business models research, we formulate that into 3 areas. So this is all around trying to navigate the almost overwhelming numbers of new businesses, propositions, startups in this area. So we've taken the approach of going to look at what's actually out there and producing case studies and primary research in a database, which is on the left-hand side. We've got over 50 in-depth case studies, but at least a couple of hundred high-level business models that we've looked at. We then use all of that evidence base to pull together 6 key categories, which we covered in this webinar. So, as Jenny mentioned, bundling is the last of these 6, and that's really a framework that we think is really helpful for clients to be able to navigate, understand, and ultimately decide which strategy might be best for their company. We've been doing all that throughout 2017. As we go into 2018, we will be looking at how we can identify cross-cutting trends. So things that we see happening across those 6 categories, but also other elements and other trends that are going on in the marketplace. So, for example, we're just about to publish a report which looks at the implications of blockchain, hot topic, obviously. But actually, what does it really mean near term and long term for the energy sector? So that's us. Jenny's going to take you through those 6 topics and what we're going to move on to today.
Fantastic. So I'm sure most of you on the line are familiar with the other 5, or the 6-pillar framework that we have created. If not, you can see a summary of a summary of them here. So our marketplace operations, focusing on relationships and interactions between different stakeholders across the space. Our time of use and flexibility, looking at flexibility, storage, demand response, and the rest of the ones listed here. But as you know, we're going to be focusing on bundling and the particular relevance that has with regards to incumbents in the energy space. So again, the agenda, to remind you where we are, we're now going to launch into the meat of the webinar and really get a feel for some of the key insights that we've generated over the last year on this topic.
So what we're going to start with now is actually what do we mean by bundling? So we've briefly touched on the fact that bundling isn't a new thing and it's not specific to energy. So when we were thinking about this, and we thought very extensively about whether we include this into our framework or not. So our definition of bundling is rather than one customer buying separate products at different times, box, service, we're buying them together. So bundling is the purchasing happens of 2 or more services at the same time in the same transaction. And the emphasis is a transaction, and it is a thought process for people. So you might think that it's old, it's not particularly new, and it's not particularly energy-centric, all of which is true. But what we've seen through the evidence base and the case studies that we've looked at is becoming increasingly widely accepted as a way of growing market share and revenue in the new energy space. And it's really important for us to kind of dwell a bit on this, actually, because it's very easy for many people who've been in the industry for a long time or a short time to say it's not new. But actually, it is a real core trend in new energy, and that's why it's included for us here.
And to follow on from the key point that it's not that it's particularly important, it's also becoming increasingly sophisticated and really interesting to the extent to which these different bundling propositions can actually be either tailored to specific customers or combined with different products and services. And that's essentially what we'll move on to. But just before we do that, we would like to just do a quick poll. Those of you who've done Delta webinars before, our love of different polls, just to get some audience interaction and really to get a feel for whether you're in agreement or what you think about this topic that we are talking about. So here we've got a question around, do you see bundling as an innovative energy business model? So that should have been launched onto your screens now. And we've got lots of different options here. So do you definitely agree that bundling is an innovative energy business model? Or a bit more on the fence about it, a bit less convinced, and it's either a yeah, I guess so, or maybe, or actually really not really, and really not convinced yet. Hopefully, maybe at the end of this webinar, different, but not convinced of its kind of relevance.
Okay, so I think everyone's pretty much finished voting. I'll give you a couple more seconds, and then okay.
And then we will launch the poll and let you know the results. It looks like we've got a clear winner, although there's, yeah,
just launch that up. So I will share our results with you right now. So 5% of you are wondering why we're even covering this. It's good. It's good that it's not all of you. Hopefully by the end of the webinar, we'll have convinced you that it's something worth considering.
But yeah, the vast majority there certainly in agreement that that this is something interesting to explore. So fantastic. Let's move on then. So we just need to. Are we just going to hide the poll from the screen so we can just go back to the slides? So that should take you back to the slides now. Fantastic. So let's just let me just take you through a bit about why we see bundling as this core trend after Charmaine has introduced what we mean by it, and so why we think it's an important innovation trend. So we're seeing this emergence really driven by the growth of many different factors, but both on the market side and the customers themselves. So we'll go through a variety of those. On the market drivers side, we're all well aware of the downward pressure on commodity margins. So this really being a driver for companies to have a look and explore the means by which they can generate revenue and broaden out their business model into different areas, thus having a look at different opportunities and bundling being one of those. A desire to grow revenue from the customer end of the value chain. So we hear all the time lots of different companies shouting about the fact that they're very customer centric, and this bundling is essentially a way of companies being able to offer customers really focus on what they want and what they need genuinely, as opposed to just kind of going halfway there or just going a little bit of the way there, and actually focusing on the end user. And then thirdly, a better understanding of the customer needs through big data and analytics and that kind of wealth of insight that you can draw from all this data. So really, it simply wasn't the case previously that you could gain a really granular, detailed understanding of end users and what their behavioral patterns were, what their preferences are, which technologies they use. So with the explosion of technology enablers and smart devices, connectivity, analytics, you're really able to drill down into that better understanding and thus be able to inform your different business models and increase and expand upon what you're incorporating within those propositions, which is inherently bundling.
Yeah, and I think the point on big data, without wanting to emphasize big data too much, is it enables you to do that at speed. So rather than it taking maybe months or years for you to get a really good understanding of a customer that changes their needs or their wants quickly, the principle of big data allows you to do that much more quickly.
On the customer facing side, we've got 4 different points here to talk through. Firstly, simplification. So we hear a lot of the time that there's a lot of confusion around so many different options. There's an overwhelming amount of choice. If you're able to bundle something together from one provider, it provides that simplicity, and it potentially removes the need to have a look across the 60 different UK suppliers of energy that are now in the marketplace, and understand the different offerings, understand the different benefits or drawbacks, and then have to do that year on year. So if you're able to, so bundling is a way of trying to cut through and simplify for customers. And developing on that is the convenience, peace of mind, and long-term satisfaction point. Once you have decided who that one provider may be, then if they're in a trusted position, you're able to, that service provider is able to instill in the customers that convenience and the peace of mind. The next 2 points talk around more customer-specific segments. So this first one on an interest in smart technologies is primarily, at the moment anyway, certainly from innovators and early adopters. And for them getting involved with these different technologies, often it's great if they can do that when they're integrated together and combined and in a bundle. And finally, opportunistic demand for one-off savings. So this is talking about customers who are really driven by saving money. It's not the convenience point. It's about the value and the financial point. And bundling can be used to address this. It can be used, for example, to the more that you buy, the greater a discount is. So you can have two elements to a bundle, and that equates to maybe a 5% discount. Or if you've got 3 elements with a 10% discount, and iterate the proposition that way. So lots of different interesting factors here, and lots of reasons why we're focusing in on bundling. But it is interesting to note that a lot of these are gradual trends, and so their importance could be underestimated because it's not a ground shifting sudden effect. But we do see all these different drivers coming together, and certainly see bundling becoming more prevalent in the future.
Yeah, that's certainly true, because it can be seen as presenting a win-win opportunity. Bundling allows for a very flexible approach, which is likely to appeal to a wide range of tastes within company boardrooms, as it offers a natural migration path from tactical market testing into full-blown strategic repositioning. So what we found is that bundling can be used to facilitate a tactical and defensive strategy. It can be used to test the market with new offers, such as, say, smart home insights hardware, for which there is a very clear customer use case, but not much real-world evidence to show that there is demand for this yet. So it can be used rather than spending a fortune forcing a new product out. It can be used to slowly test the waters and build up acceptance for new technologies. It can also be used to broaden the scope of competition and protect margins by competing on something other than price. Rather than racing to the bottom to provide goods and services for the lowest price, the addition of another good or service bundled with the original can serve the purpose of obscuring the price and refocusing the offer to customers away from that. So from the customer's perspective, while they may be spending more, it is perceived that they are getting more for their money, which can be a win-win. Alternatively, bundling can be used to pursue a far more strategic or aggressive strategy. One option is it can be used to re-engineer business processes, allowing companies to realize cost savings and manage delivery. So an example might be that using the data from connected devices to monitor their performance can then allow for integration with a repair company, say. And the repair company will then be aware of any malfunctions in the product via the data that's being received, and will then be able to come and fix it, already knowing what the problem is and with all the necessary equipment. If successful at re-engineering business processes like this can then allow companies to enter adjacent markets and developing their offers in other sectors. So, for example, energy suppliers can enter into repair or insurance or related sectors as the offer develops. It's also important to note that this is not an either-or strategy. You don't have to be tactical and defensive or strategic and aggressive. In fact, they can facilitate each other. So you could say test some offers on the market, and then as you assess how successful they are, this can then encourage re-engineering of business processes around the provision of these and the entrance into adjacent markets as and when it is appropriate.
Fantastic, thank you, Kitty. So that's a really good overview of the bundling space in an overarching overview and sort of in general. Now we're going to break that down and focus on the subcategories within what we mean by bundling. And we've identified three distinct categories, and they essentially move from the more simplistic to the much more sophisticated and innovative and therefore inherently less common in the marketplace today, but very interesting. So let's explore these. The first one we've got is simply an additional product or service being added on to the core offer of a business. So if you have a look at the little ABC diagrams here, you've got a big A, that represents the core offer, so be it energy or be it insurance, telecom, water, and you add on subsequent offers to that core. This is essentially a fairly straightforward proposition, both from the customer's point of view and from the service provider's point of view. And really, it's all about sharing the economies of scale that come through combining different elements together. So if you're able to, for example, integrate the call centers or the back office operations that are associated with delivering the different products or services, then there are economies of scale there that can be found and thus shared to some extent. So some examples of companies that we've seen doing this. Coming from outside of energy and into energy, it's interesting to have a look at the at kind of movements into the energy space. We've got here Mega Telecom, and we've also got Orange. So they're examples of companies who come from a telco background and are adding on energy and energy supply to their proposition. Likewise, Anglian Water, coming from a water background, have added on energy and created what they call a tri-utility proposition, where they provide commercial and industrial customers with water, gas, and electricity. But from the brand of Anglian Water, so that's around that core proposition. The second category, and as I say, it's 1B, so it's slightly, it's kind of a development. It can be a development from the 1A, and this is essentially around multiple products and services being bundled together as a holistic, combined proposition. So it's not focusing on one element within it. And again, if we have a look at the ABC, that is, they're all the same size and they're all surrounded by a shell, essentially. The companies who provide this are not known necessarily for one element of that proposition, but more known as a generalist or a holistic provider. A couple of examples here. So Utility Warehouse is a really interesting example of this in the UK market. They've grown from a background of telecoms, but they have expanded that they've expanded into many different service areas and product lines, and are really known for providing customers with a holistic gathering of different services and products. Finally, the third example, and this is, as we've mentioned, the most sophisticated and therefore the one that we see less specific examples in the market sort of doing this to a really great extent, but we're seeing the start of moves to this space. And so again, if we have a look at the little ABC diagram, here it is representing that the different elements within the proposition are interrelated or feedback from one to the other. So this is a really important point where essentially the service provider is focusing on synergies between the different elements within the proposition to then create additional value pools. So again, some examples here. Let's have a look at, so for example, the insurance sector. We're seeing interesting moves here to combine smart connected devices, and they could be energy related, so smart thermostats, for example, or they could be water leakage detectors and appliance maintenance. So the appliances are feeding back great wealth of information and data around the running of these different appliances. That can be fed into understanding the insurance needs around the water damage that maybe a house may be vulnerable to, or different humidity levels. So we can see the feedback between different elements within the proposition. And finally, we've got this arrow here to indicate the fact that they are increasingly sophisticated and increasingly innovative, moving towards the smart bundles at the end of the line.
Yeah, great. So now that we've talked through why we're covering bundling and what we mean by bundling and how we've broken down the bundling space into 3 core models, we'll now move on to talking about what we believe the future holds for this space. But before we say what we think, it would be great to involve you in another poll to see what you think bundling, what you think the future holds for the bundling approach. So I'll just get that poll set up here.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got the 5 different options again to get a gauge for the question here. Sorry, we're just having a couple of technical issues as well that we're just having to deal with at the same time. So here Charmaine, would you like to just run through this question while I just deal with the technical issues?
No problem. So we think it's potentially quite an interesting long-term strategy for new energy business models. But whether you guys think that is a different question. So we're specifically talking about the emphasis on long-term, whether it's, so the poll should be on your screen right now, whether it's a long-term strategy and it working within the energy sector. So whether you think that's it's not really going to die, whether it's a short-term gimmick, this is part of the whole kind of move towards a customer-centric industry, but it's only a stepping stone, whether its appeal will only be relevant to certain types of organisations. So we've talked about people who are bundling generalists and whether you have to be that, or whether, on the other side, whether most companies will be offering some sort of bundle, whether that's happening now or not. And then the last option, and I think this is quite extreme, is view in terms of bundling will have to be fundamental because it will be the way that consumers buy products, particularly in the energy sector.
Brilliant. Well, I'll give you a couple more seconds to vote, but it's really interesting.
We've got a clear winner actually, or clear kind of favourite option. 77% of people have voted. So yeah, as Kitty said, we'll just leave it open for 5 more seconds or so. But it would be good to get those last votes in, as we have got a clear winner, see if that changes or not.
Okay, so just close the screen and share the results with you there. So clearly, Clear winner is the strongest proposition that in the future going forward bundling will be fundamental rather than marginal within the energy space.
That's a really interesting. That's a really interesting choice, because if we think about what the traditional business model for a lot of suppliers are at the moment, it is very far from any sort of sophisticated or fundamental kind of bundling proposition being incorporated. So it's great to see that, and I guess we're in for lots of interesting change. So that's good.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, and it'd be really interesting to see whether any of the participants on the call come up with a revolutionary smart bundling offer in the next 12 months as well.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that with us, and we'll now move on to talk about where we see the market going for bundling. So we've already discussed the 3 different types of bundling business model, and what I'll do in this slide is talk about how we see the customer purchase proposition developing, and then the likely future direction of each of the types of business model. So focusing on the first kind, additional product service models, these are fundamentally opportunistic for the customer. The customer is able to acquire a discounted or free product in return for purchasing the bundle, which may be what tips them in favor of making that purchase. But it only works so long as the customer actively desires that additional product, and it's unlikely to inspire any long-term commitment to the core offering. The second type of business model, multi-product service bundles, develops this proposition slightly to customers by offering a simplified service such that all of the elements of the bundle integrate more with each other and result in an offering where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's far more attractive to customers than an opportunistic one-off purchase, and it does encourage greater commitment to the bundle aspect as opposed to individual components. And then moving on to the final, most sophisticated model, smart bundles, the offering to customers is an ecosystem of synergistic products and services, which are tailored precisely to the customer's needs and lifestyles, and tailored in such a way that they seamlessly integrate into their lives and allows them to manage these far more precisely. Compared to an opportunistic one-off purchase, this is a far more attractive offer from the customer's perspective, and is one of the reasons we feel that customers will increasingly show preference for the more sophisticated bundles available. So moving on to the likely future direction of the bundling business models, the additional product service approach is definitely a natural first step into this business approach, but we do feel that it will be increasingly perceived as unimaginative and will cease to be attractive to customers as more and more advanced offerings become available. So we expect multi-product utility offerings to grow in number because they do better meet customer needs. But the fact that it is complicated to offer bundles with complementary parts means that those companies that truly master this will remain small in number, and we expect them to become increasingly specialized in their offers. And as this specialization continues, and with the growth of big data and analytics providing ever better customer insights, we anticipate that there'll be significant growth in the offering of hyper-personalized smart bundles. So these will increasingly integrate products and services from other sectors and markets to provide an offering to customers that truly meets their needs, rather than sort of ad hoc sectoral boundaries. An example might be boilers with remote maintenance contracts and personalized insurance packages based on consumption patterns, say. So the likely future direction of bundling business models that we predict will be from the least sophisticated to the most sophisticated, beginning with the additional product service approach, and then developing through to multi-product services, and then ultimately to smart bundles.
And that links nicely to the different reasons why we see bundling as a really interesting area that were highlighted just at the start, talking about the customer centricity aspect and really wanting to focus on the end user and give them a proposition that is holistically meeting their needs. And that's certainly a huge element of doing that will be based on the ability to tailor or to personalize the different bundles that are available. So that's a really good link. And another one actually, Kitty, that we picked up on there was the big data link. So the prevalence of the information that is around and necessary to create these different tailored or personalized bundles. So that works really well to summarize our third section of the webinar. And move on, the second section of the webinar, and move on to Charmaine talking about the successful, the take-homes around developing a successful business model.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Kitty. So we're moving on to the section which I think is super interesting because it's about how you make all of these things work in practice, and really important for our clients, but actually really interesting for anyone that's ever tried to bring a product to market. So we see there being three critical factors for success. The first one being business process integration. So what a lovely three words to have on a slide, because this is fundamentally the hardest thing to do with any launch of any product or service. But for bundling, it's even more important because it's the center of what makes a bundling successful in the eyes of a customer. So, for example, if you're selling water and electricity, you'd ideally want to have the customer services associated with that in one central location or in one central call center, so that a customer calling in could have any queries handled by one person. But actually, that's possibly one of the hardest things to do. It's people training. It's a process of putting potentially new or adapting existing IT systems. And there's processes around that which can be really difficult in anything, but in bundling it's even more important. So the second factor we think is critical is building long-term partnerships. So by its very nature, bundling is offering more than one product or service. And it's very rare for a company to be brilliant in multiple processes. So we've seen that working with a partner who understands the second, third or fourth product very well is very helpful for service delivery, and it can de-risk some of the product offerings to customers. For example, I suppose if you have an expertise in hedging of energy, and you work with telecommunications, they're similar in many ways, but actually someone who works in telecommunications may not understand how to hedge energy effectively. We've seen that in quite a few of the case studies that we've mentioned so far. The third, and I think one of the most interesting factors, is that for product components only need to be good enough. So in our customer-centric world, the idea that you have the best product or the most convenient product or the cheapest product is very endemic, I suppose. Everyone thinks that those are the things you need to have to sell. But actually, when you come to bundling, each of the products only needs to be good enough or okay for a customer to buy into a bundle. And we think this is because the customer's thought process is, through buying multiple things at one time, they're saving time, and therefore they will accept potentially less than the best type of product. And actually, the thing that they are buying is a very tightly integrated bundle that is convenient to them. So those are the three that we've seen. Arguably, they might be applicable to any type of business model, but actually for bundling, we think that they're critical. So that concludes where we are on our webinar today. We've got two other sections that we'd kind of like to get your thoughts on. First of all, we'll take a bit of a Q&A, and we've got a couple of questions that have popped up so far. Jenny, do you want to read them out? There's a couple in the question section.
Yeah, sure. I've just asked Kitty to pull that out. Bear with us 2 seconds. Should just press. Yep. Okay. So the first question we've got here is, what makes a smart bundle difficult? So are its technical issues between the bundled products or the business models? So is it the technical issues that are between the bundled products, or is it the business model to have them all in one proposition or bundled together?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think with some product lines you will have technical integration issues with the smart bundling. So, for example, we've talked about the role of data, and in particular big data, and actually getting meaningful insight, which talks about the relationships between each product. Is work in progress. I don't know if anyone is doing that brilliantly yet, but then also, and as hopefully we've covered off on the last slide, actually there's some organizational process operational issues which are fundamental to bundling, and that in itself makes it potentially difficult. So I hope that answers that question. We've got another question which is around what kinds of customers does this appeal to? All kinds of customers. So part of the work we've done is looking at what people think about bundlers from a consumer end user perspective, and I think what we've seen is that it's the kind of business model, more so than the other 5, I think, that really has the potential to be mass market, because the idea of convenience and multiple product purchases at one time is pretty well established and easy to understand by anyone. So it doesn't necessarily have to appeal to a particular segment of the market. Jenny, I don't know what you think about that.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, we're just having a look at any of the other questions coming through as well, and seeing that. Is there any good examples of companies in the marketplace already? So I'm assuming that's probably in reference to the smart bundling question. So we are seeing interesting examples, and we mentioned a couple of those on the slides previously. But as we say, it is a very emerging space, and so the energy sector, we've got a lot of catching up or kind of learning to do and development, and sort of to test out how these different propositions work. But a nice example would be the relationship between Bosch and British Gas, and using products so for example, boilers. So British Gas boilers develop boilers, Bosch developed boilers and British Gas installing, but sharing of data between the two to then understand both from the product manufacturer's point of view more about the product development and the design and the customer operational sort of choices around how they use those different products. And from the British Gas point of view, being able to use that data to enable them to enhance and streamline the different propositions that they offer around, for example, the service maintenance or the installation process, or the repairs and the logistics that go with that.
And one thing I will say is the way we've been talking about smart bundles is very much this is where they're trying to get to. Ultimately, they will be seamlessly integratable into people's lives and will be able to provide that level of balance and synergy. I don't think any company is completely nailing this yet, but there are several companies that are expanding their offers and designing bundles in such a way as to have the parts support each other and improve the overall customer experience.
Because we're only really seeing now sort of tariffs being combined with either appliances or different products, and that's a natural bundle and an example of the first kind where you've got an additional product or service being provided in combination with a core, so that in that case being the tariff. But going forward, we can certainly see different companies learning from what does that enable them to do, how have customers reacted to these different propositions, and therefore how can they kind of take those going forward.
Yeah.
I
think that's a good point. I think there's a couple of other questions, so we'll talk about one of them, and then the other one we'll get in touch directly on that question. So someone's mentioned around what about margins? Are there really low margins in energy? And I think yes. I mean, obviously there are practically no margins in pure energy commodity supply anymore, or there won't be. So and actually we think if we go back to one of our kind of market and customer drivers slide, that's actually kind of probably the first point we were trying to make, which is there's very little margin in energy these days. So bundling is the first tactical step for people to branch into adjacent markets. So how you make more money, you sell consumers more stuff. If you can't sell them more of the thing that you sell them already, i.e. electricity, you need to sell them something new. And therefore, this kind of idea of adding new products in a bundled way and it being really engaging is a way for you to address that margin issue, profit issue, not the margin issue. Potentially, you could charge higher margins for energy if you give them something else at the same time. But yeah, I think it's interesting. So hopefully that answers that question. I think we're going to. There's a couple of questions that come through, but we'll come back to you guys directly on that one. Just to clarify that, because this is our last webinar, and I hope you've enjoyed the series. And if you haven't seen the other ones, they are available on our YouTube channel, or you can get in contact with us. We are hoping to do a very quick poll, probably should not take more than 30 seconds, a minute, around a bit of feedback on the webinars. So Jenny will bring up 3 polls in quick succession, which is, do you like the style of our delivery? So just select one. Should we be more chatty? We're fairly chatty. If you would like us to be more chatty, that'd be great. Do we talk in the right level, right tone of voice, or would you prefer us to be slightly more formal? So I'll give you a few seconds for that.
Great. Okay. So that's that first one. So we'll do about the style, and let's now launch the second one about the content of the webinar. It's really good for us just to get a feel, just a really quick indication of how we pitch these webinars, just to help us essentially get the next one right. So that'll be really helpful, just to take a couple of moments just to fill them in.
Yeah, and one of the things that we think is really important in Delta is making these webinars public. So these are free for everyone to use. They're not restricted to our subscribers. And we do want to keep that level. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, that's been 30 seconds on that one, so we'll close that. And then the last one, just around the length of the webinar. So we put in an hour. We feel that probably actually we should be talking for more like sort of 25, 30 minutes. But we get so excited and we tend to want to cover lots of information, and it actually tends to kind of extend to 45, and then we take some questions. But yeah, it'd be good to get a feel from the audience about, so what's your feeling on how long they should be? Fantastic. Okay, so that's nearly 30 seconds. Great.
Thank you very much for providing that. It will be used to make our webinars better for you guys going forward.
Yeah, so we really enjoy running them, and we hope that you get a lot out of them as well. We cover lots of different topics, lots of different research areas. as we say, we will come back to those last couple of people on the question. Actually, we've got quite a few more questions in, so we will get back to people on that. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and do feel free to have a look at the other webinars that we've got in this series. They're all on our YouTube channel. Get in contact with us if you've got any questions or just want a general discussion. We're always really keen to reach out to our network and kind of challenge each other's views, compare notes. So yeah, that'll be really, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, just to say, finally, thank you for your time. We appreciate an hour is quite a lot of time out of busy schedule, so we really appreciate that. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks very much and have a good day.